I spent 12 years working in a long-term care home. Not as a nurse, but as a therapeutic counselor, the kind of person who was called in not when things were urgent, but when they were quietly unraveling. You'd be surprised how many things fall into that second category. My work was simple on the surface. I talked to older adults, held their hands when their families couldn't come, listened when their words started slowing, sat beside them in the long, blank spaces between dinner and bedtime. And what I learned, slowly, quietly, over thousands of conversations, is that the body rarely lies. Even when the person doesn't say a word. Especially then, there are small, nearly invisible clues that start to appear when someone crosses into their 70s. Not symptoms, not diagnoses, just whispers. From the body, from the energy, from the way they move through a Tuesday morning. I remember a man named Harold. He was 74 when I first met him, sharp as a tack, as he liked to say. Always in button-down shirts, always polished shoes. He didn't look old, as some people put it, but I noticed something else. When he walked from his room to the dining hall, he'd always glance back. Subtle, almost like he wanted to be sure the hallway was still behind him. He told me one day, "I used to fly through airports. Now I walk like the world's tipping." That's when I began to pay attention to walking patterns, not speed necessarily, but confidence. How someone carries their own weight. If they shuffle, if they stop at corners, if they hesitate before turning. Many of the residents who began to slow their stride, not out of pain but out of uncertainty, tended to experience other declines soon after. Falls, confusion, withdrawal from social activities. A hospice nurse I deeply respect once said to me, "Watch how they walk before you ask how they feel." She wasn't being cold. She was being honest. The way someone moves through space reveals more than any checklist ever could. Another clue, just as subtle, lives in the hands. I'm thinking of Dorothy now. She was 79 when she started dropping things, her comb, her mug, sometimes the prayer card she liked to hold during breakfast. Her daughter thought it was arthritis. Maybe it was. But what I noticed was this. When Dorothy shook your hand, it felt like the air. There's a kind of fading that happens in the grip, not just of strength but of grounding. Older adults with a firm, steady grip almost always remained more independent, more self-assured. The ones with soft, trembling hands often grew anxious, even when their minds were still sound. Dorothy once whispered to me, "I can't hold on to anything these days, not even myself." It was one of the most honest things I'd ever heard. These changes, the shuffle of feet, the loosened grip, are not about frailty alone. They're about confidence. And when confidence begins to leak from the body, the mind often follows. Another resident, Mr. Linwood, was 81 when he said, "It's not my legs that scare me. It's not knowing if they'll be there when I stand." What he meant was he no longer trusted his body. And when that trust breaks, something inside retreats. The third sign I saw again and again was balance. Not the big kind like falling over in public, but the smaller kind. The kind you only notice if you sit in silence and watch someone stand still. A simple test we used in therapy was having someone close their eyes and lift one foot for just a few seconds. Many couldn't. Some laughed it off. Others tried and failed silently, not wanting to admit the wobble. But I always paid more attention to what they did after the test. Did they joke about it? Or did they look down at their own body with suspicion? That reaction, that relationship with their own body, often mattered more than the result. Because balance isn't just physical. It's neurological, emotional, spiritual even. One woman, Clara, said to me after struggling to stay upright for 5 seconds, "I think I've been off balance for years. Just not physically." We forget how interconnected it all is. Muscles, nerves, emotions, memory, they don't live in separate boxes. They sing in the same choir. And when one section goes quiet, the harmony changes. There's something else that changes, though most people don't talk about it, and that's sleep. Not just do you sleep 8 hours, but the texture of the night. I sat with Henry, who was 77, and asked him how he'd been sleeping lately. He stared at the window for a while before answering. "I don't rest," he said. "I just lie there and wait for morning." Sleep tells us what someone won't say aloud. Restlessness at night can be a clue, not only of physical discomfort, but emotional unrest, unresolved grief, even early cognitive shifts. The body repairs itself during sleep, especially the brain. If those hours are broken, the repairs don't complete. Henry's forgetfulness got worse. Not fast, but steadily. His blood pressure rose. His energy dipped. He became more irritable. And still, his charts looked fine. But his eyes didn't, and neither did his nights. Sleep changes are among the most overlooked signs of deeper shifts in health. Often, families dismiss it as normal aging. But what's normal isn't always harmless. If I could say one thing to families, it's this. When an older adult tells you they're tired but not sleepy, listen carefully. It means something. There's a drawer in most older adults' homes that no one talks about. It's not the one with the bills or the spare batteries. It's the one with the vitamins, the expired crackers, the forgotten cans of soup, the protein shake sample someone once dropped off. It's the drawer of "I should eat more." I know. Appetite is a fragile thing after 70. I can't count how many times I've heard someone say, "Food just doesn't taste the same anymore." They're not being dramatic. They're being honest. It's not just flavor that disappears. It's desire. I remember Lillian. She was 76, elegant, wore perfume even to breakfast. She used to love making stews, but one morning she told me, "I just don't feel like cooking anymore. It feels like a chore, not a pleasure." When I visited her room later that week, I found 3 unopened trays of food under her bed. Not because she was sick, not because she was stubborn, but because she simply wasn't hungry. Here's what I've come to understand. When someone loses interest in food, we must ask what else they've lost interest in. Appetite is tied to engagement with the world, with self-care, with the rituals of being alive. When it fades, it often brings other losses with it. Muscle mass, energy, social activity, even memory. I once sat beside a palliative nurse during lunch and she whispered to me, "The dying almost always stop eating before they stop breathing. Not because they want to die, but because their body has already started saying goodbye." Now, I'm not saying every skipped meal is a signal of the end. But when a person over 70 begins to consistently avoid food, especially the meals they once loved, something deeper is shifting. We can't force-feed our way back to joy, but we can sit beside someone while they eat. We can ask what they still enjoy. We can prepare a single warm bowl with love instead of overwhelming them with full plates. Sometimes what they need most is company. There's another clue I've seen, quieter than hunger, but just as telling: how someone handles stress. We all have stress. Even in old age, the pressure doesn't vanish, it just changes shape. Worries about money, about children who don't call, about bodies that no longer obey. But after 70, how someone carries their worry can be more dangerous than the worry itself. I worked closely with a man named Paul. He was 82 and used to be a surgeon. Brilliant mind, sharp tongue. But after retirement, he began pacing. Every little thing, a late lunch, a cloudy day, made him clench his jaw. His blood pressure rose. He stopped sleeping. He became isolated and then forgetful. The nurses thought it might be early dementia. But I sat with him one afternoon and just asked, "What feels heavy right now?" He looked down and said, "I don't know who I am if I'm not fixing things." That right there was the root. His entire identity had been about control. And aging for him felt like chaos. Stress in the elderly isn't always about what's happening. It's about what's no longer in their hands. And when they can't talk about it, it turns inward. It becomes inflammation, insomnia, chronic pain, even cardiac strain. I often ask families, do they have a place to be heard? Not solved, not fixed, just heard? Because unspoken stress is a slow poison. Sometimes, just sitting beside someone, saying, "I'm here, you don't have to carry it alone," can do more than any medication. Which leads me to the final clue I'll speak about today, the shrinking of the social world. After 70, the circle begins to tighten. Friends move away. Some pass. Grandchildren grow older. The phone rings less. And little by little, the silence grows louder. Marianne was one of the most social residents I'd known. Always humming, always inviting people to sit with her. But one winter, after her best friend in the facility passed, she stopped coming to the lounge. "I just don't have the energy," she said. But energy wasn't the issue. Grief was. Grief is a thief, not just of people, but of motivation, of habit, of connection. And when someone stops reaching out, stops chatting at lunch, stops even opening the curtains, they are not just tired, they're untethered. Isolation is more than sadness. It's measurable. Research shows that loneliness in older adults increases the risk of heart disease, cognitive decline, and even early death. But you won't always see tears. Sometimes the lonely smile. They say, "I'm fine." They wave politely. They become quiet, and we mistake it for peace. So I ask, who do they speak to daily? Who do they laugh with weekly? Who do they touch, even a hand squeeze, with some regularity? When those answers become unclear, intervention is needed. Not with force, not with guilt, but with presence. Right? Call, visit, or just ask, "Would you like to sit outside with me for a while?" Because the body listens. To silence, to laughter, to absence. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. There's something that changes in the eyes first. I've learned, over the years, to watch carefully, not just what someone says, but where their gaze goes when they say it. Some people talk about the future and their eyes lift, even if they don't smile. Others speak about tomorrow and their eyes drift downward, already letting go. I once sat with Robert, a widower at 80, who had just moved into the care facility. During our first conversation, he looked at the calendar more than he looked at me. I asked gently, "Do you have something planned this week?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "I'm just trying to remember what day it is." But that wasn't it. He was watching time move, not to catch up with it, but to understand how much of it he might have left. The way someone looks at time tells you how they feel about living. Robert eventually shared more. He told me he didn't fear death. He feared becoming invisible before it came. He feared becoming a man others only speak around, not to. That's another clue that often goes unnoticed. When someone no longer expects to be seen, they begin to vanish in spirit before their body ever lets go. And you can catch it early if you listen. There's a heaviness in their steps, not physical weight but emotional fatigue. Not a limp but a slow kind of surrender. Like each movement costs more than it used to. Not long ago, I was walking behind a woman named Jean as she made her way to the garden. Her steps were careful, but what struck me wasn't her speed. It was the way she paused at each doorway, as if waiting to be asked in, as if uncertain whether she still belonged in the next room. That kind of pause often means more than weakness. It means she's navigating more than furniture. She's navigating self-worth. When movement slows in this way, when it becomes hesitant, rather than simply careful, it often signals a shift in how a person perceives their place in the world. I've seen this time and again, especially in those who used to move with purpose. When the grocery list is gone, when the daily walk becomes optional, when no one is waiting at the other end of the hallway, people move differently. They move more like they're drifting than arriving. But there's something else, something I consider one of the most revealing clues of all. It's what happens when you ask someone, "What are you looking forward to?" It sounds like a simple question, but for someone over 70, it opens a doorway. Some people light up. They talk about an upcoming visit, a favorite meal, a movie they're waiting to see again. And even if those plans are small, the energy they bring is unmistakable. Others look down, pause, then change the subject. When that happens, I don't push, but I take note, because the absence of anticipation is its own kind of silence. The body responds differently when it has something to look forward to. Appetite improves. Rest becomes more peaceful. Conversations get a little longer. Even posture changes. I remember Tom, a former teacher who used to say, "Give me a reason to wear clean socks, and I'll shave too." Sounds like a joke, but it's a blueprint. Hope, even in its smallest form, sustains the body in ways we're only beginning to understand. When hope leaves, something deep inside the person shuts down. And yet, hope is rebuildable. One of the most powerful things I've witnessed is how quickly older adults reawaken when they're invited to matter. Sometimes it takes a letter from a grandchild. Sometimes it's being asked to teach someone how to fix an old radio. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "Would you be willing to share your story? I'd really like to hear it." You'd be amazed how many seniors haven't been asked anything meaningful in years. And that neglect, that subtle erasure, takes a toll. In fact, in my experience, the people who live longest and, more importantly, live best are not always the ones with the strongest bodies or the cleanest diets. They are the ones who still feel they have a role, a reason to be. Purpose is medicine, even if that purpose is tiny. Watering a plant, feeding a cat, calling a niece, praying for someone. I once sat with a man named Edgar, 86, who told me, "I make it my job to say something kind to the first person I see each day. It keeps me from turning bitter." He was, to me, one of the healthiest people I ever met. We measure so many things in charts: blood pressure, mobility, BMI, but we don't yet have a number for whether someone feels they matter when they wake up. Maybe we should, because what I've seen again and again is that the moment someone begins to believe they're no longer needed, the body follows that belief. Quietly, faithfully, like a loyal friend walking beside you even toward the end. There's a quiet kind of preparation that many people miss. It doesn't look like writing a will or giving away possessions, though those may come later. No, the earliest signs of preparation often show up in small, almost invisible ways. A man starts going to bed earlier even if he's not tired. A woman begins throwing away old greeting cards, not out of bitterness, but out of a sense that, "I won't need these much longer." I once sat with Eileen, 83, as she folded her scarves into neat piles. I asked if she was organizing for spring. She smiled and said, "No, I'm making it easier for someone else to know what mattered to me." That sentence stayed with me. There was no sadness in her voice, only a kind of peace, as if she was gently setting her life down, one scarf at a time. You see, not everyone announces when they're nearing the end of their journey. Many elders won't say, "I'm ready to go." Instead, they'll begin to let go piece by piece. They stop buying new clothes. They cancel appointments they used to keep. They stop correcting people when misunderstood. There's a shift from holding on to letting be. I once worked with a man named Frank, a quiet veteran, 87. He used to clean his shoes every Sunday without fail. But one week, I noticed he wore the same scuffed pair 3 days in a row. When I gently teased him about it, he looked at me and said, "They'll outlast me. What's the point in polishing what's already finished?" It wasn't resignation. It was realism spoken without fear. That kind of acceptance is not something you can teach. It's something that emerges after a long life of struggling, loving, losing, and learning what can't be changed. But here's what I want families and caregivers to know. Just because someone is preparing doesn't mean they've given up. It means they're listening to their own rhythm. It means they're finding peace, not always in comfort, but in clarity. I've seen many older adults become calmer in their final years. Not passive, not depressed, just still. They no longer worry about what they forgot at the store. They stop counting calories. They begin to cherish weather, not control it. They speak less but mean more when they do. It's a kind of spiritual refinement, like time has polished them down to their essence. And with that stillness comes another signal that I've learned to pay attention to. They begin to talk more about people who have already died. Not with grief, not with longing, but with a sense of closeness. Margaret, 86, once told me, "My mother has been visiting in my dreams again." Some might dismiss that as imagination, but in hospice care we see it often. Elders begin reconnecting internally with loved ones they lost decades ago. They remember birthdays. They hum lullabies they haven't sung since childhood. It's like the soul begins to gather its old threads, weaving a final pattern that only it understands. I once heard a palliative nurse explain it like this: the dying often start to live in both worlds at once. One foot here, one foot somewhere else. That overlap can be disorienting for families. They may see it as confusion or talking nonsense. But I encourage you, listen anyway, because in those quiet stories, In those odd moments of memory, something deeply sacred is happening. Something we don't need to fix, only honor. And here's something else that I wish more people knew. Laughter does not stop, even at the edge of life. In fact, some of the most meaningful, gut-deep laughter I've ever witnessed happened within weeks, even days of someone's passing. It wasn't denial. It was release. As if they were saying, this body may be leaving, but I'm still here. And I remember joy. Gerald, 79, had late-stage cancer. On one of his last days, we were watching birds out the window and he turned to me and said, "You know what I miss most? My hair. Not for the looks, for the wind." We both laughed. Then he whispered, "You never realize how much of life is in the details, until the details are all you can still hold." That was the last full sentence he ever spoke to me. And it was, in many ways, a summary of everything I've learned. Life, especially in the later years, is not about big achievements. It's about the subtle, the touch of a hand, the taste of something sweet, the sound of a familiar song. And so the final clues, the ones that tell us how someone is doing, how long they might have, are not found in machines or monitors. They're found in whether they still turn on music when no one's visiting, whether they still water the plant by the window, whether they still pause to watch the rain fall. Because when those small acts stop, it's not just the routine that's changing. It's the readiness. There's a moment, it always comes quietly, when you realize that what matters most isn't what still works, but what still moves you. After all these years working with older adults, I've stopped looking at charts first. I start by noticing how someone reacts to light in the morning, whether they still pause at a blooming flower, if their shoulders soften when someone calls them by name. Because I've come to believe that the body doesn't give up first. It waits for the heart to decide its time. You can have someone whose heart is strong, lungs steady, vitals perfect, but if they've lost their connection to meaning, their decline will come fast and quiet. And then you have others, those who are frail, thin, nearly immobile, but still glowing, still cracking jokes, still offering to pray for someone else's grandchild. These are the ones who surprise even the doctors. They outlive every prognosis, not because they're stronger in the body, but because something inside them refuses to dim. I remember a woman named Grace. The name suited her. At 91, she could barely walk. But every morning she asked for the curtains to be drawn, her lipstick applied, and her classical radio turned on. She said to me once, "I may not have many days left, but I still intend to be here for each one." Presence. That's what it was. Not longevity for its own sake, but being present for the hours she had. So if you're listening to this and wondering, what should I look for? What should I notice in myself or in someone I love? Start here. Notice if you or they still respond to beauty. It doesn't have to be grand. Just the way sunlight hits a wooden table, the sound of a favorite voice, the smell of coffee, the memory stirred by a familiar tune. When those things still reach someone, they are still deeply here. Another sign, though few talk about it, is generosity. Not money, not even time, but attention. The willingness to ask someone else how they are doing. I saw this most often in the ones closest to death. They would say, "Tell me something good about your day." Or, "How's your mom doing? You said she had surgery." Even when in pain, even when tired, they still reached out. And that too is a health clue. Not found in labs, not tracked on screens. But it matters more than we realize. Because when a person begins to shrink emotionally, when they stop asking questions, when their interest in others evaporates, the internal light begins to dim. We are, at our best, relational creatures. And no matter our age, we thrive when we feel we can still offer something. Even if that something is simply listening. I once saw an older man, nearly 90, teach a 7-year-old how to fold paper cranes. Took an hour. His hands trembled. The boy fidgeted. But at the end of it, the old man looked at me and said, "I did something today." That's it. That's the clue that matters most. Did you do something today that meant even a little? It's not about productivity. It's about purpose. And purpose doesn't disappear with age. It simply changes shape. It may look smaller from the outside, but inside, it's often brighter than ever. I hope, In sharing these quiet clues, I've helped you look beyond the obvious. Beyond symptoms, beyond numbers, beyond the rush to fix. Sometimes the most we can do, and often the very best we can do, is simply be present. To notice, to sit without an agenda, to ask questions that don't require answers, to say, I'm here, I see you, I'm glad you're still with us today. Because in the end, most people aren't afraid of death. They're afraid of being forgotten before they die, afraid of silence, afraid of fading without someone bearing witness to who they were, who they still are. So if you have someone over 70 in your life, tell them what they've meant to you, not someday, not when you find the perfect words, just now. Because the final truth, the one nobody really tells you, is that the best predictor of how long you'll live is how deeply you still feel loved, and how often you still choose to love, even when it's hard. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,